first job they gave you underground?
Whew. The main thing was, at that time, was to try to keep the main lines open. You know, and they'd slough, and they wanted to keep the main lines open, so there'd be a slough and you'd have to go in with a car and shovel it up, you know, and bring it out and dump it.
Was there water in that mine?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was water. They had a regular, the water came, at that time it came from the Anselmo on, what was it, 28, I think. And then it worked itself. They had the ditches and stuff, and they got over to the shaft, and I think it went down to the, I think the water level then was at 36. And then it went over to the higher. That's where the pumps were at that time.
So it just
I
kind of
don't remember too much about that.
Yeah, so there weren't many pumps in the original. It just kind of
no.
went on over the Iowa. Do you remember if there was any connections between the original and the Steward?
There were, but I never had the occasion to go there back and forth, you know. I knew that there were places where you could go. Now I found kind of accidental, they had a little drift driving in the original, and it hauled with a drift that was being driven from the con. And I was there when they hauled that, and there was a couple of men from the con came down, you know, slid down this.
Huh. That's a long ways.
Yeah.
Remember what level that was on?
I think that was a 28. Everything seemed to happen on the 28.
Yeah. How deep did the original get, do you remember?
I think about the 36.
Yeah. But it opened back up and started operating again while you were there?
No.
It never did?
No, it never really operated after I was.
Well, what about the West Gagnon now? How far away from the original was that?
Well, you see, John, there was what we call the real Gagnon.
Okay. And where was that?
And that was practically in the same yard as the original. But it was west of the original gallows frame. West and a little bit north. And it was still there when I was there. The engine room was still there, and it was a big wooden building, you know, big wooden building. Now I can't remember the head frame, but I'm sure it would have been wood. But that shaft was an inclined shaft, the Gagnon. I saw the Gagnon station underground on a couple of different levels. It happened to be something that I had to get into for some reason. But the West Gagnon was west of Montana Street. Right west of Montana Street, there's a kind of a little hill there. And you walk over that hill and then down the other side, and there's the Gagnon.
Was it on a line with the Gagnon and the original, kind of in the same
Yeah, yeah, on a line with them. But that was an air shaft.
Oh.
And I did some work around there. Now, that air shaft was pulling hot air, you know, from the mines, and the fan was on surface. And it was pulling in a big plume of steam there all the time, you know, especially in wintertime. And they were working at the time that I'm thinking about, they were putting in a new fan on the 3200. The 3200 was the bottom of the West Gagnon. That was the bottom. And they were putting in a fan down there, right alongside of the shaft. And they had me to bring down cement, you know. So I'd go up and I'd get a timber truck and bring the trucks into the shaft and load them onto the cage and then take them down and unload them.
Down the West Gagnon
Yeah,
shaft?
down the West Gagnon. The West Gagnon was, seemed to be lined, that shaft was lined like with cement or something, you know, it was. And the wind was so strong coming up there that it'd blow your jumper right over your top of your head. And all we had was carbide lamps. Well, hell, you couldn't have a light. So when you went down in the dark. Once you rang her away, you were in the dark until you come to a place, I think it was the 20 level. And for some reason, there was one light there. And that seemed to be where the engineer changed the gears or something, because you'd come to almost a stop and then go again. And I remember being there because you could see the water going up the side of the shaft.
It was being blown up the shaft by the wind?
Yeah, little
drops and streams.
It was little stream of water.
I'll be darned. Was there water in the bottom of the Gagnon, of the West Gagnon?
There was, but nothing to speak of, you know.
Well, where was the hottest place you were ever at in the hill?
I think the hottest place that I ever got into was, I think, on the 3200 of the original. And I went down there with a fella named Tommy Battens. He was an ex-shift boss. And we had to go straight south from the shaft and then wander around a little bit. And we were down in what we called the Colorado country. The Colorado Mine at that time was pretty close to where the Mint Bar is now, on that corner.
Yeah.
I think there's dumps and stuff there yet. But that's where the Colorado was. And that was hot. Oh Christ, it was hot in there. Because as I think back on it now, there was no circulation, you know, but nothing to draw the heat out. It was just in there. It was just like stagnant heat in there. And we worked in there with Tommy Battens and I. That was the hottest place I ever been into.
That was in the early 30s.
Oh yeah.
Well, when you were mining during Prohibition, would you ever hear any rumors of beer or bootleg whiskey being hidden underground? Did you ever hear those kind of stories?
No.
In the Colorado or the West Coast, any of those?
Nothing like that.
What about, what did you do for entertainment in those years? Did you go out much? Or?
Oh yeah, there was 3 or 4 of us about the same age, and we'd go out, but we didn't have any money to spend. And we'd go pretty. One guy had an old car, and we'd go down sometimes to the White Swan on the flat down there where there's a bank there right close to the Kmart. There's a bank on the corner. Well, the White Swan was just about in that area. It was a good sized place. And believe it or not, they have nickel beer and they bring it out to the car. Yeah.
Like a drive-in?
Yeah.
It was a drive-in. Yeah.
They weren't They weren't as big a glass as you'd get in a bar, but they were, like that. And they'd had, several young guys, with a tray. How many?
And they put the tray on the window like a root beer stand?
No, they'd bring it up. No, they'd hold it there and you'd take them.
Would they come and get the glasses, or later? Or?
I don't know. I suppose they did, but I just don't remember.
Now, were you living at home while you were still mining?
Yeah.
You stayed at home. And that was that here, or this house?
Yes, I think it was. I think it was right after we moved here.
So you were up in Marysville then when the 1934-35 strike hit? You weren't here?